Everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Rafaela and I hope that everyone is having an amazing day. I hope that you guys have been taking care of yourself and putting yourself first and prioritizing your mental health and your health in general. Today's topic of discussion is the importance of vulnerability. Lately, I've been thinking about vulnerability, how it's so often misunderstood as a weakness when in reality is one of the most profound sources of strength that we have. It's through vulnerability that we experience real connections, authenticity and growth. And it's the birthplace of love, compassion, trust and truth. But to be vulnerable, we need to feel safe. And that kind of safety, especially between two people, is something that's very sacred. What strikes me is how vulnerability and trust are so deeply intertwined. Vulnerability cannot exist without trust, and yet trust cannot be built without vulnerability. It's a delicate balance, a mutual exchange between the two. I think that sometimes we may see vulnerability as an enemy. I know that I did a few years ago. If you were to ask me about vulnerability, I wouldn't have the same perspective as I have now on it. And I think that comes from practicing vulnerability with people. Through your practice, you will notice that not everyone needs to know your business, quite literally. Not everyone is meant to know certain things about you, and that actually sometimes you're met with rejection and sometimes you're met with responses that actually make you feel worse than they make you feel better. They don't really bring you comfort, and that's why it's really important to have that trust with someone. To build that trust is not a one-way street where you are vulnerable with them and they're never vulnerable with you. I don't feel like trust can form or bloom from that. It takes both people being honest and open with each other. That's why it is a sacred thing. But sometimes we get to see vulnerability as an enemy, or we want to avoid it because we've had our experiences with certain people where they took our vulnerability and they formed some sort of weapon against us and they used it against us, which can hurt a lot, more than a bunch of things, because it's a state where you let your mask down, where you let your armor down and you talk about all these real things and all these things that happened to you, to a certain person. And I like to think that even though a few years back I wasn't really open to being vulnerable to people, I still feel like I did a pretty good job at setting up the space where they could be vulnerable. I was never someone to use someone's weakness against them or wish upon the downfall and use that information as something against them. But I also realized that just because I don't operate like that and I don't do those things, it doesn't necessarily mean that other people don't and won't. So I guess be very careful with who you share certain information with, not in a paranoid way, but trust has to be built. So vulnerability in a way is something that's earned through building trust. I'm also learning that vulnerability isn't a dramatic one-time reveal, that it's a quiet, continuous and intentional practice. It lives in the small, honest moments, the ones where we choose truth over performance, where we're letting ourselves be seen, and in doing so, giving the others the permission and the space to also be seen. But it's hard, and avoiding vulnerability can feel safer, especially when we've been hurt before. Putting up walls give us a sense of protection, but it also creates distance, and not just from others, but even more so from ourselves. In relationships, I'm realizing how vulnerability is the bridge that brings two people closer. Real intimacy isn't built on perfection, but rather is built on the shared imperfections, the kind of acceptance that is rare and powerful, and it can only exist when both people are willing to be real with each other. Still, I can't ignore the risks, as I mentioned before. Vulnerability asks us to take a leap without knowing if we'll land safely. There's always a chance that we won't be met with care or that someone won't honor what we've shared. We might face judgment and rejection and even betrayal. And that's why not everyone has earned the right to hear your story. But even with risks, I believe the rewards far outweigh the fear. Vulnerability invites healing, connection, and a life that feels more honest and whole. And in the end, I'm coming to see vulnerability not as a weakness, but as the essence of being human. It calls us to live more deeply, to connect more honestly, and grow more fully. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a messy and uncomfortable process, but also a brave and beautiful one. And in a world that often encourages us to armor up, choosing vulnerability is a radical act rooted in self-love, courage, and truth. Now, that was the whole journal entry for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was rather short. As always, I hope that you take care of yourself, that you have a lovely day, and let me know, have you ever experienced a time in your life where you've been vulnerable and you felt let down, or you felt rather alone in your vulnerability? Or if you actually had rather good experiences that made you grow and made you love and opened the doors to trust and connection and living more authentically. So that's it from me. I hope to see you next time.